Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special webinar. Today is called Appsmith using Appsmith, and we're about to showcase what Docsmith is. I'm Kevin Blanco, your host for today's session, and I'm thrilled to have you all here with us. So, let me tell you something, and this is coming from my personal experience as a technical director and as developer. Crafting technical documentation can be a daunting task. Writers often find themselves investigating substantial time and effort, and engineers might not have the necessary skill to write technical information. Right? We might be good developers, we might be good technical directors or leaders, but we might not be the best writing technical documentation. And at Appsmith, we faced this challenge head on. So that led to the birth of Docsmith, which is our own AI powered solution. So today we are diving deep into the heart of AppSmith's capabilities with no other than one of our co-founders, Nikhil, and I'm super happy to have him on board. So hello, Nikhil. How are you doing?
Hey Kevin, thanks for having me on board. Super excited to meet you all and just demo what we built internally. Hopefully, also let's build Docsmith together and just show everybody how they can leverage AI to improve some of their internal workflows.
Excellent. So, Nikhil, the floor is yours. But before we jump into it, as usual, I like to invite everyone to join to the community portal. That's where we share templates when we have our tutorials and things like that. So, it's definitely the place you want to be. So, make sure to create your community portal free account, and you will be able to bookmark and favorite your special articles or webinars and things like that. And also, if you haven't already, start using Appsmith today. It's completely free to start on with the cloud version, and definitely you're going to learn a lot of things today. So you want to have your account ready to duplicate what Nikhil is just going to show us. So with that said, Nikhil, I think the floor is yours to start explaining us what was the challenge and how do we solve it and start actually building it.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. So yeah, I think what you said earlier really resonated with me. Engineers find it really hard to write good content, and technical writers have to figure out all the intricacies of a new feature, how it's built, what actually went into it to be able to write that content, right? And technical documentation is really important for any product, especially developer tools, right? It's how all our developers learn how to use the product correctly. But it takes a lot of time to actually create good technical content,
Right.
and especially to kind of also maintain that level of consistency, right? Because you have different writers, all of them have different writing styles. You
Mhm.
want to kind of create the same level of consistency, tone, language, all of that, right? And even format for that matter. And so we took that problem statement in mind and we thought, hey, how can AI kind of help us achieve this? And so I'm going to start by sharing my screen and just showing you what we built with Docsmith. I
Perfect.
hope you can see it.
Yep, we can see
And
it.
and so this is Docsmith. It's a simple interface that you can prompt to generate technical documentation. So I'm going to ask it to write a guide on, let's say, how to summarize support conversations using OpenAI, right?
Mhm.
I'm also going to tell it to, let's say, fetch the support tickets from Zendesk using Appsmith and display it on a table. And let's also tell it to, when a user selects a row, um, send the table, send the ticket to OpenAI to summarize. All right. So I've given it some very broad strokes information to create a guide, right? And I'm going to just hit send and kind of send this to OpenAI. Now, the assistant is going to take some time. It's going to take about 60 seconds to actually generate the doc. So in the meanwhile, I'm going to tell you what's happening behind the scenes. So we're actually using OpenAI's new assistant API, right? And what OpenAI has done is it's created these different assistants, or rather the ability for you to create different assistants that are sort of specialized agents that perform a specific task. So It's as easy as coming to your OpenAI screen, going to the assistant section. You can create one over here. And I've already gone ahead and created something called a documentation writer. So let's check this out. So the documentation writer, I think it didn't go. Yeah. So this is the documentation writer. And what's really unique about assistants is that you can give them specific instructions, right? So I've told this assistant that you're an expert technical writer, you have a deep understanding of Appsmith. Told it to always be consistent with its writing. I've asked it to use specific code examples and not generic ones. I've given it some information about how to write JS objects. I've also asked it to always return Markdown and things like that, right? So I was able to give this assistant specific information and specific instructions that makes it a better writer than just a general GPT bot out there, right? And I'm also able to use the latest GPT model, which is GPT-4. And with this, it's able to write larger long form content as well as more accurate and more creative content. So this model is much, much better at generating content. And at the same time, this bot comes with some very special features like code interpretation and knowledge retrieval. Now, knowledge retrieval is especially important for what we are doing because what this allows us to do is it allows us to upload specific files to this assistant so that this assistant can now become smarter. So I've actually uploaded two pieces of content, which is our Appsmith documentation markdown file and our Appsmith pricing markdown file. And these are two markdown files that I've generated from our documentation page over here. So, this is all of our documentation. And with this markdown file information, the assistant is now able to know what does Appsmith documentation already look like? Because, hey, it's a technical writer, right? I'm asking it to be a technical writer of Appsmith. So it should know the type of content that's already been written and use that content to write similar style documentation, as well as it's now really smart. It understands everything about Appsmith because it has access to the Appsmith documentation as well. Yeah, so that's what's really unique about the assistant API given and why
Nice.
we're using it today.
That's really
And so
nice.
when we go back, right, we can actually see a guide that's been created that has prerequisite steps. And if you're looking for what AppSmith documentation looks like, you can see that it's actually quite similar. It also has prerequisites and different steps, right? So you instantly know that this is very familiar to what you're looking for, and with just a few lines. And it asks you to create a new dashboard, asks you to create a new data source. It asks you to get the tickets API, which is actually right. This, I believe, if we go to Zendesk right now, Zendesk documentation, or rather, its API reference, ticketing API reference, uh, the port API quick start guide. Uh, Yeah, so you'll actually see that yeah, this is the right API request format over here.
Mhm.
And all of this is, and it's actually gone ahead and found the right information, right? So that's really convenient for us. It's also said add table, bind it to the API using the mustache syntax. Yep, which is exactly what you do in Appsmith.
Mhm.
Use OpenAI, and so it's gotten all of these things, kind of in place for you. And this becomes really easy now because um, an engineer who's, let's say, built a feature, let's say an OpenAI feature or a new particular widget on Appsmith, right, and wants to write a guide about it, can
Mhm.
actually begin writing this information. If they can just prompt this Docsmith application with a few lines of information, and it's going to give them content that's very close to what the actual content is. Now, it might hallucinate a little bit, but
Mhm.
you're going to get 80, 90% of the way there. And so then it becomes as simple as just saying, hey, let's just copy this document from here. Let me actually send it over to our technical writing team, and our technical writing team can just take the last this document over the last 10-20% of the way and fine tune it. And so with just this, Kevin, we've taken our documentations down from spending like 2.5 days on documents to like just about a little over half a day on documents. So it's like 5x increase in no time, and we've been able to create guides faster with better quality. We've been able to create
Exactly.
reference manuals and concepts And it's just spearheaded our entire documentation team in such a wonderful way.
Exactly, and definitely that's one of the things that Appsmith and also AI it's trying to achieve, which is problem solving. And the fact that it addresses one of the most traditional pain points, which is documentation. Like I've been in multiple projects in multiple companies, and
Yeah,
the same it's all over the same. Everywhere is the same. You know, we have certain artifacts, certain products, but we lack documentation, and that's a problem because, again, developers might be really good writing code, might be really good at solving problems, but when it comes to documentation, yeah, it might be a bit boring. And definitely what you just came out with probably is going to have better quality than something that a
yeah,
developer on a daily basis might rate. So it is something
yeah.
that solves the problem, bootstrap with ease, and it has a quality enhancement.
Yeah, absolutely. And this wasn't very hard to build either. So I'm going to show you how we can actually build something like this on Appsmith, in just a couple of minutes.
Awesome.
Um, so let's get started. This is a blank Appsmith app, Docsmith demo. Let's go to our data sources. We've created
Sorry,
an open.
Nikhil, could you zoom in a little bit so it's easier to read for people? Just a, yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So these are our data sources, and we created an open AI API authenticated data source. I'm going to edit this to show you what it's like. So here I've added the URL, and where you find all this information is directly inside your open AI console. You can go to the bottom. There's a section called documentation. You can click over there, and you want to go to the API reference tab, right? So under API reference, you're going to find some information on authentication. And you can see that this is the base URL that you want to actually add, as well as you want to get the Open AI key. So the Open AI key can be gotten from the API key section. You can go over here, and I've already created a demo key for today, which I've added in. So you can create a new key for yourself, copy that, and go ahead and add that directly under the authentication token over here. So this is where your Open AI key goes. And remember, today we are using the Assistant API. This is not the regular Open AI chat completion API because we already have an integration for that, and that's really easy to use. We're using the cutting edge beta Open AI Assistance API. And so we also need to pass the beta header to it. So we're going to add Open AI beta here, and we're also going to add assistance is equal to V1, right? So this is integral to making sure that this works. And once you have this up and running, right, we can just go ahead and create a new API. So the first API that we're going to create is called create threads, right? And so Kevin, what a thread is basically like a new conversation, right? So like if you see just any chat application, right?
Mhm.
Whenever you start a new conversation, that's basically called a thread. And so in the assistance API, they have a concept of a thread, which is a new conversation. And you
Mhm.
need to be every time you're starting a conversation with an AI agent, you basically want to create a new thread for it. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're going to first go under the documentation section and figure out how to create new threads. So once you come under the API reference, you can say under the beta section, there's something called threads here. And there is the create thread API. So we're just going to copy this bit. Yeah. So it's a post. We're going to pass this over here. We don't need a slash because it's already there. It's a post method. And we're also going to check, it takes in a optional list of messages, but I think right now we can start with empty. We don't really need a list of messages. Great. So we have a thread created. Super simple. Already we get that up and running. But we also want to store this thread ID somewhere, right? Because we're creating a thread, but we want to remember that thread because we're going to keep chatting with this bot. We can tell it new things. Like, if I dislike this example, I can actually tell it, hey, could you update the document and make some changes to it, right? So that's the advantage of the Assistant API. It remembers context, right?
Right.
So we want to store this somewhere. And so I'm going to create like a JS object, which is like utils. I love utils classes. I
Mhm.
use them everywhere. It's super convenient to just get something up and running.
Yeah.
Um, and so let's call this actually let's call this initialized because I want to run this whenever our whenever our page loads. So whenever a page loads, I want to initialize something called create thread. I'm going to run that. And what I'm also going to do is whenever the thread is created, we're going to go ahead and store its value in the thread ID. All right, so let's take the create threads data ID. Let's put that over there. And that's another thing. Let's make sure that this always runs on page load. Yeah, so that we always have some data over there.
Mhm.
So let's refresh once to make sure we actually have this data running. So we've gone there, we've hit create thread, and the next thing we kind of want to do is we also, oh, actually, oh yeah, I've already checked that it's running, so that's fine. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and add some messages to this thread, right? So let's actually build out a UI for that first. So I'm going to start with the container. Let's let's just start calling this Docsmith, right? I maybe update its style a little bit. And let's use a nice light color like green. Okay, cool. I think I like that. Okay, and now what we want to do is we also want to display the response from OpenAI. And if you'll notice one thing is that in my instructions, I've actually asked it to always return Markdown for me because our documentation is entirely written in Markdown. So, I want my AI assistant to also give me Markdown. So for Markdown, we're going to use the rich text editor, right? We're going to create a rich text editor and we're going to use the Markdown mode over here.
Okay.
And that's the most convenient thing with the rich text editor. It can take an HTML Markdown, no problem. It just renders it really well. And we're also just going to take in a input box below.
Mhm.
And this input box, I'm just going to call it prompt right now. So let's make that prompt. So I think this is my basic Docsmith UI. There's a place, a window to see the response of the API. There's a window to take in a prompt. And what you want to do is now we want to add a message, right? That's going to go to OpenAI. So
Mhm.
let's actually duplicate this API and let's add an API called add message. So you got to go back to the reference for this under the messages section, you'll see that there is a create message API, right? And this takes in thread ID slash messages, right? So threads slash thread ID, if you remember, we actually stored that in our Appsmith store, right? So we can
Correct.
just directly access that over here and we can just say messages. And yeah, you can see that the value is also correctly there in the store. So we're good. That means create thread ran perfectly. And so in the body, we also need to parse some information. And what it takes in is a role and a content. Now, the role is basically whether you're the assistant or whether you're the user, right? And in this case, Kevin, so we're passing in the data from the user because the user is who is giving the prompt, right?
Right.
So the role I want to send here is actually user. And the content that I want to send is from the input, right? So I'm just going to take the inputs text and that's the content that's going to go to the assistant, right? So we can probably just try running this on empty data. Great. So it's going to send some data. But this doesn't mean that the assistant is going to give you back any response yet. This is just you sending a message. You're not still telling the assistant that, hey, I want you to evaluate my message and give me a response. So they've separated those two things out.
Mhm.
And in order for you to ask the assistant to give you a response back, you need to create a run. Okay. So there's a run object over here, and there's a run method. And this is basically threads slash thread ID slash runs. So we're going to create one more API, which is basically to run a thread. And we're going to say thread slash thread ID slash runs. And let's have a look at what the runs API takes in. So it takes a thread ID in the params, but it also takes in an assistant ID in the request body. And our assistant ID is something we can get from our OpenAI playground. Yeah. So here, this assistant ID basically tells OpenAI which assistant do you want to actually evaluate this entire conversation thread. Because you could have multiple assistants, as you can see, right? I
Correct.
have I have a various bunch of assistants from support managers to documentation to writers and things like that, right? So
Mhm.
we are looking for which assistant, and that comes as part of your assistant ID. Yeah. So I'm just going to take the assistant ID and hard code that over here in the run thread section, right? And so this is going to run the thread for us. Great, so that worked. But you'll still notice, Kevin, that we didn't get a response from the assistant. So what happened in this section is that we can see that it ran the thread, right? It was
Mhm.
200. And it sent all of the instructions to it. These are the instructions for the assistant, that you're a technical writer with a deep understanding of
Right.
Appsmith. So it sent the instructions, right? And even sent the file IDs. The file IDs are the context that we uploaded, which is the documentation and the pricing docs, right? So that
Mhm.
it knows some information about Appsmith and it's able to write well. But it didn't give us a response. And the reason for this is that OpenAI has actually created runs as an async job, which means that it's going to run in the background and you have to wait for that response, right? And so you have to keep checking as to whether that response is ready or not, because these are typically long running operations. They may take up to 60 seconds to actually be fulfilled.
Okay.
So to do that, we have to create another API. We've got to fetch some messages for this thread. So let's create something called fetch messages. It's a get API, and we can look at it under here. It's under list messages. And so it's a get API that takes in the thread ID, pulls the messages from it. So let's take in thread ID messages. Great, I think this should work. All right. And so from here, we can see that, okay, it's given us some response. It says that there was a problem with interpreting the files and whatnot, but this is basically the entire response that OpenAI gave us. And so we need a way to actually keep checking as to whether the assistant has responded or not, right?
Okay.
So what we're going to do is we're going to have to poll, right? So we're going to have to poll these messages and we're going to keep polling them. So let's actually create a few functions for that. First off, we're going to create an add message function, which is basically going to first, let's say, add the message to that particular thread. And every time it adds the message, I also wanted to go ahead and run the message, right? So I'm going to say run thread over here, and we can probably return these. Awesome. And what we have to do is wire that up to our input. So whenever the input is submitted, I'm going to go ahead and execute the utils function with add message, right? And also it's going to reset on submit. So that's fine. So now every time a message is added, we also need to go ahead and start checking as to whether the response has come, right? So let's
Mhm.
create something called poll messages, right? And what poll messages is going to do, we're going to use set interval to go ahead and keep checking every, let's say, 2 seconds. It's going to run our fetch messages function, right? To see
Mhm.
whether any data is there. And every time it runs fetch messages, what I'm going to do is I'm also going to check whether the response of fetch messages is what I wanted. So I'm going to check if the fetch message is data. And so the data is an array. And the reason it's an array is because OpenAI is returning all of the messages, right? So you have an array of messages returned. And the
Mhm.
reason I'm checking the 0th index is because it returns all messages in the reverse chronological order. So if you're having a chat with the AI assistant, the latest message is always going to be in the first, in the 0th position, right?
Got it.
So I'm basically checking whether the latest message is actually my message or not.
Mhm.
And the first thing I want to do is actually check if the role is assistant, right? Because if it's just the user's message, then you can ignore that. That means I haven't really gotten anything back yet. So it's got to be from the assistant. And the second thing is it's also not got to be empty. So I'm going to check if the content, and content is also an array, text value, right, is not equal to empty. Okay, so if
Mhm.
those two things are true, then we're kind of good. That means that we actually have some data now. So what I'm going to do is, okay, I want to also stop this interval, right? Because polling can be an expensive operation. You don't want to be polling forever.
Right.
So whenever you have an interval, I'm going to also give it an ID. So I'm going to call this fetch messages, right? So that's the ID of my set interval. And so now that I know I have the data, right? Like I've come into this if condition, we're just going to clear it. We're going to run clear interval over here. And so it's going to stop polling. You've got your data. All things are good. And with that, we kind of know we have this information. And along with that, we can probably create a nice helper utility to, let's say, get the message, because the message is pretty deeply nested. As you can see, it's like way underneath here, right? So let's just make that a little cleaner so that we can display that information. And we can, let's say that message should be empty by default. But if this condition is true, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the message to this particular value.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then I'm going to return the message here. So that's going to be a little handy, nifty, handy function for me. Yeah. So I can see that this is actually the response that we got right now, right?
Mhm.
And here, what I'm going to do inside the rich text editor in the default value, I'm going to use the utils and pass the get message over here, right? So what this means is basically the message that I got from OpenAI is always going to kind of be displayed over here. And I'm just going to use an input to fetch this. So we can try it out. We can say write a guide to, let's say, upload a file, right? I'm going to hit enter, and this is going to send that information. Okay,
Mhm.
but there's a problem now, right? Like we know that it's kind of the API has been triggered, but there's no feedback for the user, right? Like it's a long running API. It's probably going to take like 60
Right.
seconds, but the user has no idea what's going on over here. So we need to create a kind of loading mechanism. So I'm going to use a progress bar for that. It's one of my favorite ways of creating like a loading mechanism over here. We can set it to infinite and just make it like a small circular bar. Yeah.
Mhm.
So we set this over here. So this tells us that it's loading, but we also need to control the visibility of this so that we know actually when it's loading versus, it's always showing up on the screen. So we can do that by updating our utils function a little bit. So to do that, what I'm going to say is, let's say every time we add a message, what we can also do is we can go ahead and store a value and say is loading
Mhm.
is true. Yeah. And every time we pull messages and we've actually gotten the data from the fetch messages API, we can say that you no longer need to load. So we can store value that is loading is false, right? So
Mhm.
that's a really simple way of doing this. And we forgot to do one thing. We forgot that once we run the thread, we also then want to begin polling, right? So we need to actually say, hey, utils dot poll messages needs to run every single time we actually get this thread, right? So you
Mhm.
want this to actually begin running at this point in time so that this happens and we're able to start getting this information, and there we have it, right? So now
Mhm.
we're seeing that it's actually written uploading a file in Appsmith. You can use the file picker, customize the file picker, create a new API, post it, use multi-platform. So it's doing all the things that we really wanted to do,
Right.
but we want the progress bar to also correctly show. So we're going to change the visibility of this to just say appsmith.store data is loading, right? And so now
Mhm.
it's hidden over here. It's not going to show in this node. And I'm just going to say something like update the document to, let's see, rename the file picker to select files, right? And so, okay, now we know that as soon as I hit enter, we can see that the progress bar loading showed up.
Mhm.
And as it's kind of going on, this is a much better experience for users, right? And
Yeah.
so with this, it's really easy. I think, I don't know, this must be like maybe like 20, 30 minutes in.
Yeah.
We've managed to actually create like a full-fledged Docsmith application that works with OpenAI that's able to generate really rich content for you. and on top of that, this is just the basics, but we've actually created a lot of interesting features inside our Docsmith application. Some of them actually include, for example, the ability to copy this content. So if I say copy document over here, it's actually gone ahead and copied the markdown that's present. We can also do things like select, let's say, share. And what share does is that it actually stores the thread ID, because
Mhm.
every thread is a new conversation, right? And
Mhm.
so whenever you pass the thread ID to the URL, it automatically loads that thread ID for you so that you don't have to remember the context. So
Right.
this means that, if an engineer has actually prompted Docsmith with some information, they can then copy that same URL, give it to a technical writer. And then the technical writer can actually prompt Docsmith a little bit more. They can say, hey, update this documentation a little bit more, do
Mm.
X, Y, or Z on top of it, and then continue to take it forward, right? So they don't have to start on scratch again.
Right.
That's what's really wonderful about this. And the other really cool thing that we've done over here is you can also check out the history. So if you have more prompts, you can actually go back in time and check out what the previous prompts were and stuff
Mhm.
like that. So we baked in a lot of the intelligence of the app for our workflow, and it's made writing technical documentation a cinch at Appsmith today. And with that, you can see like, hey, in Docsmith, it's actually done that. It's dropped the select files onto the canvas and all that. So it actually updated the same document with the information. I think it got it right. It's not the select for it got it wrong. It's not the select files widget. It's the file picker widget. But I've told it to do this ambiguously, so it made a mistake there. But it's managed to actually go ahead and update the same information,
Right.
which means that you're actually having a conversation with it to change things on the fly rather than you having to write it all over again, right? So it saves you a ton of time in that aspect.
Yeah, totally. And what's even more amazing is the fact that it's already coming like styled.
Yeah.
It's adding if it's a piece of code or if it's something that should become documented or commented, it's coming formatted. So you don't even have to worry about giving it style because it already has the title, the headlines, the piece of code. So it is truly amazing.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this, and we're always looking for new use cases, trying to build more exciting things with Appsmith, because we really think that with AI, Appsmith is the easiest way to just make your internal operations more efficient, and that's a really exciting space to be in.
Excellent. So yeah, actually last week on the release jam, in case you missed it, we announced the OpenAI data source. We went through like an example on how to use, for example, the Vision API to analyze an image, and we used the camera widget. So in case you missed it, take a look at last week release jam because we actually went through the data source. But this particular example that Nikhil just shown, it went even deeper into how to use OpenAI. So definitely, this is something that it has plenty of use cases. And in January 2024, we are going to have another session around OpenAI and other use cases. For example, we are thinking about real estate and people on the field taking images and maybe require analyzing and require the creation of a contract and things like that. All of that can be powered by Appsmith and OpenAI. So we have a bunch of use cases that we're going to elaborate even further in January. So definitely stay tuned. Nikhil, today is actually the last webinar of the year. So I don't know if you have any closing words for this 2023, anything you want to share. How was this year? Was complicated, hard, exciting? Was everything one together, right?
Yeah, I think this has been such a wonderful, exciting year for us. We just hit 30,000 stars, which was something we're really really excited about. I think we're like one of the top 500 GitHub projects of all time, and that's something we're really happy about, because we've always believed that Appsmith is a tool that every developer should have access to, right? And that's why it's open source. So that was a huge milestone for us. We made like huge progress with a bunch of security features, a bunch of developer features, everything from SSO to custom widgets and JavaScript objects and custom libraries. All of those, we've just on the hearts of so many developers out there. and we've shown so much impact within large organizations that I think it's been a wonderful year. And looking at the horizon, I'm really excited about some of the exciting things we have coming up next year. Everything from our new workflow engine to our new packages feature for reusability, and even how we are thinking about stepping up with AI and helping every business out there incorporate it inside their workflows. I think 2024 is going to be even more exciting and even more jam-packed than 2023.
Exactly. Yeah. I've been looking at the roadmap, and in case you haven't, everyone in our audience, it's completely open and it's public. You can go to our public roadmap on GitHub, which, like Nikhil just mentioned, we overpassed the 30K stars, which is quite a milestone. And yeah, take a look at the public roadmap because we have exciting features we're already preparing for. Announcing and making sure that you understand how all of them are going to work, but are pretty exciting features that I know all of you are going to love. So, with that said, I think that's we draw the curtains for this final webinar of 2023. Nikhil and I are filled with the immense gratitude for the incredible journey we have shared with all of you, like your enthusiasm, your creativity, and unwavering commitment to building remarkable applications on Appsmith has made this year truly extraordinary. So, in the spirit of collaboration and innovation, we want to express our heartfelt thanks. Appsmith is more than just a tool, it's a community of builders, creators, and dreamers. And together, we have redefined what's possible, and the best is yet to come. So, as we embark on this journey in 2024, we invite each of you to continue being an integral part of the AppSmith community because your feedback, questions, and passion drive the evolution of our platform. So, thank you so much for 2023 and looking forward to 2022. And thank you so much, Nikhil, for your time. And it was quite a blast to build something completely production ready in less than 30 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Kevin. Yeah, this was really wonderful, and glad we got to show some of the AppSmith skills to the rest of the community and how they can use AI.
Excellent. So, with that said, we're going to be cutting off here. And thank you so much and have a great rest of the day.